exciting for the presentations this morning. So I would like to tell you, announce that we have coffee and water in the bottom of, in the back of the room, and have a nice presentation. Thaisa is going to have another announcements for you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Hope you all enjoyed the day yesterday. So we have a minor inconvenience today. We're going to have sessions during the morning at 10 a.m. We're going to have a nice coffee break. And unfortunately, Mike Habib couldn't come. He has a newborn baby, only 4 months old. And it was really tough to try to schedule come all the way here with being a new dad. So he won't come to the meeting anymore, I'm sorry. So we are not going to have the 11:10 presentation that was going to be from Mike. We are going just straight to lunch break then. And then during the afternoon, we're going to have a poster session. And the poster session will be followed by Fabiana, that she will talk about biomechanics in pterosaurs. Again, Mike is very sorry that he couldn't come. We are all very sorry. But don't worry, there will be plenty of opportunity to have him, in the near future. So without any further delays, let's begin our sessions. Thank you.
Just to call him.
Okay, he will
So we are going to start our first presentation of the morning with Joseph Houston, and the title of his presentation is Bite Marks Associated with Pterosaur Material from the Kemken of Morocco.
All right, good morning, everyone, and thanks for making the early first session here. Appreciate that. Next slide. So I think most of you have at least a general grasp of what the Kemken holds as far as the fauna and as far as the structure. It's considered to be Cenomanian, but that's still somewhat in question. Red alluvial sandstones, a lot of microconglomerates, and originally it was definitely a big freshwater system, large freshwater, but it certainly leans into some brackish as well. There's some similarities to the faunas here, mosonid, coelacanths, Aripisuchid crocodilians, and certainly some of the pterosaurs. To date, there's at least 9 taxa described from the fauna, and it looks as though there's definitely more in the works, so we'll certainly get more out of this fauna as far as pterosaurs are concerned. Typically, the elements are isolated individual bones, some of which are broken, some are rarely articulated at all, but they're preserved in 3 dimension, and so the fidelity of the preservation is really fantastic, and it really helps clean some of the information about the fossils themselves. Next slide. Thank you. So this is just an example of kind of a rarer with a nice, long, complete, fully inflated wing flange, and you can still make out some of the muscle attachments, and it remains pretty true to its original form, so you get a really good feel on the bowing and arching of the bone. Next slide. So most of the pterosaur material described to date has been based on jaw sections. So far there's certainly a number of ornithocheirids, anhenguerids, and a number of various darkids, including topojarids, chowyangopterids, and a whole host of others. Next. So this is a cervical vertebrae, and it's just really missing this part of the attachment, but otherwise it's really well preserved, just beautiful bone. You can really make out a lot of the structure and the attachments to it, so it's a really useful piece. But for what I was working on with bite marks and trying to deduce some of the interactions of some of the other organisms in the system, that's not exactly what I was looking for. So I was looking for bones like this next slide, which very similar vertebrae, but badly fractured. And I looked real closely at this vertebrae to try to determine if there were any bite marks that I had found on some of the other pieces. I couldn't deduce bite marks out of this piece, but it certainly showed the trabeculae, which were kind of recently described, and considering it had been bashed around and sandstone infilled, it still had really nice structure, and those are just like maybe pin size, but they're still in place. So it was an interesting piece. Next slide. So this was the piece that really started my whole project. And doesn't look like much. Most people outside of this room wouldn't even figure it out to be a pterosaur. But it's about little over 4 centimeters, but with real distinctive puncture marks on it. And next slide. And this is the other side of the fossil. And right here, there's a nice other puncture on the other side and caused a breach of the bone. So it certainly was shattered by that bite. Next slide. I was able to get the bone x-rayed. It's sandstone infilled with matrix, and my hope was that I'd be able to determine if there was any tooth fragments or anything that would lend to me determining exactly at least what group of animals was involved in inflicting these bites. So this was a northocherid frontal jaw section, and right here there's a puncture wound, but the thing that was interesting about this puncture wound was that it shows some healing. And there's still some of the sandstone matrix in there. I wanted to avoid doing any damage to this section until I had a little better way to get into it. Next slide. And this is the palatal side, and you can see here almost the same thing. And again, you can see some of the sandstone matrix still in place. But between this mark and the one on the snout, they definitely both showed that they had been inflicted prior to the animal's death, and they showed some healing. This is the distal ulna, probably in Asdarchid. And this one has, you can barely make out, it's more small, not full punctures through the bone, but indentations that certainly indicate feeding, either post-mortem or the cause of the animal's death. Next slide. So with these 3 pieces were my main focus. And with this wound and this wound healed, this with more smaller indentations and fracturing, and then this with more real distinct puncture wounds. The fauna of the chem is fairly well known, the vertebrate fauna at least, and there was definitely a number of organisms that could have inflicted these bites. So I did some work through the literature. There's certainly Salacians, sharks, that have been involved in pterosaur bites from the Moorville, from the chalks of Kansas, and even with associated lamniform teeth. And there are certainly lamniform sharks in the fauna. They tend to be out of brackish parts of the environment, but they were definitely something I needed to look at. So I analyzed those, and I also looked at some of the bite marks that have been inflicted by lamniforms from the Miocene, because there's just so many examples from Shark Tooth Hill. So I was able to discern that it was really unlikely that any of the bites that I had dealt with, any of the bites that I had dealt with had been inflicted by a lamniform shark of any sort. I also looked at the actinopterygians, coelacanths, lungfish, and the dental structure of all those didn't match what really could have been possible. So then I worked into the bony fishes. So the first slide's a number of smaller bony fishes, but one of the things that's interesting about the chem is that aside from having a very dominated by carnivore predator complex, there's also a lot of fishes, bony fishes especially, that reach over 1 meter in length. So they certainly could have been involved in the bite inflictions that I saw in my study. Go back, please. Thanks. So the attacur, the dentition on that certainly was possible for at least the ulna bites, as well as the edarcher, which is the next up, and then finally the Bawanides group, and the helicomorphs, which are bowfins. They're still alive today, but there are some that are reached significant size in this fauna, and unfortunately the only jaw sections I was able to examine for those were the dentition was fairly well destroyed, but I was working on matching those pieces together along with some of the broken parts I had. Next slide. So then I moved into the crocodilians, and there's certainly documented crocodilian bites, both from Australia and certainly some from Romania. And the first group I looked at was the Aripisuchids. And the interesting thing about these crocodiliforms is that they have a nice piercing, almost canine. They have a heterodont dentition, and so the rest of the teeth doesn't show super well here, but they're spatulate and almost leafed, like a varied tooth morphology, and so it was very unlikely that they had inflicted any of the bites that I looked at. Next up. So the Elasuchid group tend to have a blunt dentition, but all of the crocodilians have very varied dentition throughout their mouths, and so depending upon where in the jaw section you're looking at the tooth structure, it gets a little more complex as far as where in the jaw would have inflicted those bites. But at the same time, I definitely noticed that an individual of the right size range certainly could have inflicted the bites that I was looking at. This jaw section was a little too big, but it was definitely in the range as far as the spacing of the dentition to cause the bites that I had observed. Next slide. And there's a whole host of other crocodilians, some of Sereno's work, and there's various work now on the crocodilians from there. But there's certainly a number of crocodilians. This is at least three different species. Some of them have a little bit of crenulation on the teeth, but they certainly could have potentially inflicted the bites that I was looking at. So I wasn't able to rule that group out. Next slide. So then I moved into the dinosaurs, and the fauna is certainly dominated by theropods. So you look at the carcharodontosaurids, which are an allosaurid relative. Megapredator, really large animals. But one of the things that I also drew out of this study was the fact that there's everything from, this is probably about full, normal adult-sized tooth, but ranging all the way down to juveniles. And so I had to look at not only adults of some of these organisms, but potential juveniles or younger groups in the clades. Based on the normal serrations, blade-like structure of the teeth, I was able to dismiss carcharodontosaurids from most of these potentials as far as potential biting. Next slide. The abelisaurids, it was kind of the same thing. There's definitely different age groups, but I certainly noticed that there were some of the size ranges that would have worked, but again, the blade-like teeth with the serrations, I was able to rule them out. And there's been theropod associations out of the parts of Canada that were directly associated, so I definitely wanted to look at that, but these teeth definitely didn't fit the profile. So the other theropod dinosaurs, and there's still some questions regarding the groups, is noosaurids, dromaeosaurids. A lot of it's based on either pretty minimal material or teeth. So again, these were in the size range, but based on the structure of the teeth, it didn't seem to quite be a fit. So before I ruled out theropods completely, I had to look at spinosaurids. And there's certainly been spinosaurids associated with pterosaurs, you know, the irritator tooth jammed into the, I believe it's an ornithocherid vertebrae set. So that was something I had to look at. And again, really large predator, large carnivore. Those are huge teeth, but the dentition of spinosaurs is varied quite a bit. So you get further back in the mouth, there's some fairly small teeth. Next slide. And there's also a number of age ranges when you get into the spinosaurids. So I noted that there were both mid-size down into juvenile, some of the teeth were fractured, and again, taking into account some of the teeth in various locations of the jaw sections, I couldn't completely dismiss this animal and causing at least the bites on the wing metacarpal. Next slide. And then we get to the pterosaurs. And the teeth that you see on this side here are fairly common from this formation. And they range in size. There's a lot of different morphotypes that have been discussed, and some tied to jaws for descriptions. And when you get into this is rooted, and this is a little further back in the jaw section. And these teeth have a little more straight character to them, and they were certainly in the right size range to potentially have inflicted the bites that I was looking at. So first thing I guess I really drew out of this was that I need to look at more material. Having more dentition in place in some of the jaw sections to do comparative work would definitely be useful and helpful. One of the things that really, for me, was very telling with this whole thing was that having associated and certainly articulated specimens always wonderful. There's nothing like looking at a Solnhofen Archaeopteryx or some of the other things. But I think we all realize that most of the pterosaurs that we come across in most of the faunas of the world are partial or very partial, but a lot of information can still come out of those. And traditionally, Jurassic and Cretaceous sites in particular have been really looked at for the dinosaurs, all the big parts of the fauna. And to really get a picture of a paleo ecosystem, you have to look at all the small fossils, the broken fossils, the plant fossils, the insect fossils. And really the goal, describing pterosaurs and their biology is definitely an important aspect, and that's why most of us are here. But it also certainly is important to tie them into ancient ecosystems to determine how they interacted with each other, with other animals in the fauna, and you get a really better feel for just exactly how they worked in the grand scheme of the world, and it really helps understand the overall biology of these animals. The Chem definitely continues to yield more and more fossils, certainly more pterosaurs. I believe there's a new one in the wings here coming pretty soon as well. So it's continually yield these fossils. And I would definitely suggest that even some of the fossils that don't look to be a whole lot to begin with can definitely yield a great deal of information to put pterosaurs into the context of the environments that they inhabited. Next slide. Wow, kind of small, but these are some of the references that were really useful in this study, and some of the references contained within those references will certainly help me continue this work down the line. And so I appreciate there's some of you here or have kind of helped lay the foundation for some of this work already, so it's been a great use. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Erica Stapleton for some commentary and certainly some photographic work. Dr. Polito for work with the x-rays, some additional photographs by Mr. Borgstadt. And I'd like to thank everyone here and certainly the committee for putting this together. It's really fantastic to have a room full of people that care about pterosaurs. So it's a great opportunity to speak, and I'd like to thank you guys for having the time. And I want to thank my wife for her assistance and patience in all my pterosaur endeavors. And if there's anything question-wise or anything, any words of advice, any thoughts, I'd be very happy to hear from anyone on that. Thank you.
So, Joseph, I really liked the presentation. This, I mean, we should have seen more pterosaur material bite marks already, right? Well, I think we are missing a lot of stuff. That one with the obvious bite marks is incredible. But I'm very interested in understanding how you managed to do this. How many of those specimens did you x-ray? Because, for instance, some of those bite marks are not healed, but the others that are healed, they should have like a bone growth. Do they have it?
I haven't got a chance. I'm going to have to use. So with the one that was that I really want to dive into a little bit further is definitely the front ornithocheira jaw. And reason being is that it definitely shows healing. And to me, it was really interesting both on the nasal and on the palate. So the palate I could have dismissed as something that had transpired during feeding or something like that, but to have both the palatal and at the end of the nasal, it could have been an interspecific thing. It could, there's a lot of potential for it to be something other than just a feeding issue. So that one I want to really delve into. It's a really thick bone, so I'm going to have to do better than a dental x-ray to see what's going on.
I mean, I think that's the best of the worlds would be to have a CT scan, but I certainly do know how hard it is to get CT scans, but perhaps an x-ray, I mean, I think it would be great. And I think that bone is amendable because it's very steep like this, so it might be amendable, yeah. But it's very interesting. Thank you for presenting. I mean, it's, I don't know, did you happen to see any other marks like made by beetles or fleas or something like post-mortem?
I looked for borings and that kind of thing. Insects are a big thing of mine. I have seen wood sections from there that have beetle borings in them, but I didn't detect any in the bone. But I looked through a lot of bones and a lot of different collections to really try to see if I was seeing bite marks. And it was just that little initial section that it was like, oh, that was bitten. And then when I looked really deeply into it, I was able to determine, okay, there's puncture wounds here, and you can see that right where the punctures were, there were fractures, and then seeing the healed marks. So it definitely set me on a course forward. But yeah, there's got to be more material out there.
Yeah, I know, right? That's got to be more. Thank you so much, Joseph.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Hey, Alex.
Thank you. It was a very nice presentation. I have actually a couple of questions, but I'm just going to make two. The others I'm going to catch you to talk. Number one, have you done fieldwork there? And number two, is there, because it just strikes me with that puncture mark that you presented on that upper jaw. Could it be inflicted by some competition among different individuals?
That thought certainly crossed my mind, and the fact that it had healed, interspecific male fighting kind of definitely crossed my mind. I thought it was maybe a little bit of a stretch to make that determination, but it was certainly something that bears more looking into, and I think getting a CAT scan might really help determine a little further. And I have not been able to field collect there, but I have some very dear friends that have spent much of their lives working through those materials. And we've been invited, so I'm looking forward to trying to get out there and do some real tight stratigraphic work in the field out there.
Well, you mentioned only males. It could be females as well.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, no, I didn't want to dabble. I thought I was reaching a little too far to come to that conclusion on this, but it definitely is a significant potential, because there's certainly species infighting, or various species. There's definitely a number of ornithocurids and anhanguerids. So it's certainly reasonable to suggest that for territory, for mates, there was competition that would cause the infliction of those bites.
Anyone else? So thank you very much, Joseph.
Thank you. Obrigado.
So the next person who's going to present is Arturo Heredia, and the title of his presentation is A New Cenomanian Pterosaur Track Site from Northwestern Patagonia, Argentina.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Okay, I am going to talk about footprints. In particular, about pterosaur footprints, tracks from the Cenomanian Candeleros Formation. So here we are. This geological unit is located in South America, in Argentina, in the Neuquén province, next to Chile. So this is the Neuquén Basin. You can see the boundary basin here. And these points here and here are different track sites from the Candelero Formation. This is the first record from Calvo and Lockley 2001, the first record from Pterosaurs tracks from Gondwana. And here we have another site that I'm going to talk about. First, this is a track site that I studied for my PhD thesis, and this is the new track site. So you can see this is located in the central sector of the basin, and this is more in the border, in the marginal, almost the boundary from the basin. We are talking about a couple of 100 kilometers far. So the Candelero Formation is Cenomanian in age, as you can see. It's the oldest geological unit from the Neuquén group. And this is all continental deposits. This is the Upper Cretaceous. This is the locality from my PhD thesis, Aguada de Tuco. The Candeleros Formation is over the Rayoso Formation, overlying the Rayoso Formation. And this is a profile. The pterosaur tracks are located here. Also, we have some dinosaur tracks, theropod and sauropod tracks. But only in the surface, in the level with pterosaur tracks, these are the only track of tetrapod, but also we have some invertebrate trade fossils in the same level. And the pterosaur track are preserved in sandstones from fluvial deposits. This is the track bearing surface. So here we have a manus impression, another manus impression. So for everybody that don't know how is the morphology of a pterosaur tracks, we have here some examples of manus impression. This is a typical manus track, so from a pterosaurus. So you can see the asymmetrical morphology, tridactyl. This is the digit 1 impression, the digit 2, and the digit 3. So here we have some schematic drawings. In some case, we have some pairs of manus tracks, probably produced by the same track maker, because we have the same size and morphology. And here we have another track bearing surface, and so you can see a paste track. It means a footprint from a feet. So we have 3 impressions. This is interesting because in some case, the paste track, you can find in some cases 4-digit impression, and in other cases only 3. But this is the case that we have only 3 impressions. This is a schematic drawing, and to help us to observe more clearly some of these features, we have, for example, this is a false color depth image generated by photogrammetric techniques. And also we have contour line map, also is so helpful to observe the impression of the digit. And here we have another examples of manus and paste impressions, but we have another morphology, more subtriangular in shape. And here you can see the impression of the digit. We have only 3 impressions. This is a bigger paste track than the before. So we are talking about 14 centimeters in length. And also we have some other manus impression. You can see digit 1, digit 2, and digit 3. So this is another example of other preservation. For example, this is a positive epirelief. It means it's convex. And this is so interesting that associated with this all pterosaur track, we have these other traces. In this case, showed by these white arrows. And these are too many furrows. So they are only in the surface from the pterosaur track and associated with all these manus impressions and surrounding also the pest. For example, this is a detail of these furrows. Some we have a case of furrows crossing each other, but some other are parallel and curved together. So I am going to talk about these kind of furrows later, but here we have the new locality of pterosaur tracks called El Sauce, in the Sauce locality. So these tracks, we've found these tracks this year. So in May, we have a field trip to study these tracks. So this is a preliminary study. This is a profile. Also, sauropod remains were documented here. This is the pterosaur track. Many of these tracks are found in slabs like this, and are preserved. These are preserved in sandstones, in coarse grain sandstones. That's also something interesting because of the preservation in alluvial deposits. okay, we have some of these tracks, for example, Manus impressions. Here we have a pest with triangular morphology with 4-digit impressions. So we have a false color depth image to observe these tracks. We have a pest track here and here, but as you can see, the morphology is different. This is more rectangular, and this is subtriangular in shape. Also the contour line map to see the same tracks. And we have some, well, this is the same slab, but we have the light of the sun in some angle that it's possible to observe the shadow into the footprints. Other slabs, we have some Manus impressions, a detail of these Manus. So again, you can see it, digit 1, digit 2, and an impression of digit 3. Another Manus impression, but in convex relief, so the same detail. And also, we found this slab with triangular tridactyl impression of dinosaurs, a small impression, but associated with these pterosaur tracks here. And so talking a little about the echinotaxonomy, I say that the first record was Calvo and Lockley, 2001. So this is that record, the first Gondwana pterosaur record. So these authors attributed this track to the Comfortera ignus species, but it is interesting how the majority of the pterosaur tracks correspond to the Pterainus ignocinus, but maybe this is some kind of problematic ignotaxon, because almost all the species are Pterainus. So I think that this needs a revision, because the morphology of the Manus is more conservative. So I think that it's important to see the features in the pest impression. So we compare with other tracks from on the other sites, and yeah, these pterosaur tracks have similarities with the Ignocinus pterainus, but probably due to some important differences may represent another ignotaxon. But to say that if it's a new or not a new ignotaxon, we have to find more tracks. So what's happened with the track maker? So in the Canderos formation, we have indeterminate pterodactyloid remains, but so we compare, for example, the autopod, is some rare, not common remains in any pterosaur, but we have the possibility to compare the morphology of the autopod of Pterodaustro, a juvenile, with the smallest pterosaur track. We have some similarities, for example, in the length of the digits. And talking about something about the polycology, some polycology considerations. So it's talking about only the ignological evidence. We have some the marginal marine deposits. We can find footprints are from the late Jurassic, and what's happened while in, the continental deposits are related with the Cretaceous record. So taking into account this data, Lockley and colleagues proposed that this could reflect a shift in the habitat preference from the Jurassic to the Cretaceous. So in the case of these tracks, that is consistent with that observation, because are preserved in fluvial and alluvial deposits. And other things that here we have some tracks, but are associated with other kind of traces, like claw marks. Maybe the pterosaur was swimming, and also some big marks. But if you remember that I was talking about some particular pharaohs that are associated with manus impressions, so maybe this corresponds to a claw marks rather than big marks. So another paleoecological consideration, the manus would be more favorite to imprint relative to the pest. Yeah, that was something proposed by other authors, probably due to the center of mass is directly forward in these animals. So this is the case that we are studying in this track size, both Aguada de Tuco and El Sauce. We have many manus impression compared with the pest impressions. And another thing that we have some different size of tracks. So a question that arises from this is that maybe this corresponds to some kind of gregarious behavior or not. But we think that the morphology of the footprints of the smallest and the biggest one are too different. So, but maybe these correspond to different species, not to different individuals. It means, for example, juveniles, youngers, and adults. So this is the South America pterosaur fossil and ichthyological record, but it's only to show you the poor pterosaur track record that we know from all South America, only here. And some similar happened with the pterosaur track record from Gondwana. So we only have a record in Argentina and also in Morocco. And so this is a stratigraphy record from pterosaur skeletal remains and footprint from Gondwana. As you can see, the footprint record is shown by this color and is only in the Upper Cretaceous. So the footprint record is underrepresented with respect to the fossil remains, and only footprint from the Upper Cretaceous are known here. So this question arises from this data. It is due to preservation bias or rather lack of search and find. So nevertheless, new Gondwana pterosaur footprint keep appearing. For example, this is a paper from the last year that published in Diversity and Open Access Journal. This is some manus footprints. And here we have, so this is another so important thing about the ichnology evidence. So as you can see, we have some remains, bones remain from other animals, but the only ichnological evidence, the only evidence of, for example, birds, also pterosaurs, are the ichnological evidence. So we have some a new pterosaur track site documented in the Sauce locality, and also this pterosaur track is similar to Pterainus, but we have to do more study to determine if we have a new taxon or not. And some footprints are similar to morphology to the feet of Pterodaustro. Also, was interested to try to study if the different size of the footprints correspond or not to a multi-age gregarious behavior. And finally, the footprint record sector is underrepresented with respect to the pterosaur footprints remains of Gondwana. So I want to thank the Crato organizing committee, also the CONICET and University of Buenos Aires funding, also the Paleontological Society Arthur Bocon Research Grant for the support, and the APA Bungeborn Research Grant. So this is the group from that we are working in El Sauce, the new locality. So, muito obrigado. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Arturo. Does anyone have any questions for him?
Congrats, Arturo, and I would like to just little question about the overrepresentation of manus versus peace. Could it fit, or do you think that could it fit about launch? Launch could be related to behavior, or we kind of we have a bias, or it could be presented that that issue as a behavior that the footprints of menus are overrepresented.
Yeah, that's a good question, Borja. I think that maybe it's related to some kind of feeding behavior, yes, because these are different kind of environment that some of these animals but maybe go to feed, and also but that's interesting that we don't have any trackway. You know, the trackway is well, the walking of an animal, evidenced by the footprints, but we have too many tracks, but isolated. But yeah, it's probably that this bias is related with some kind of behavior that rather than I don't know, at a phonomic. But maybe that's so important that the animal is maybe is staying with all the weight of the body more forward. So yeah, using the manus.
Anyone else? So thank you, Arturo. Obrigado.
Thank you.
So let's move on to the next presentation. Esaú Vitor de Araújo. The title of his presentation is Quantitative Paleohistological Analysis in Kaiwajara do Brusque, Tapejarini, Corroborates Endothermine Pterosauria.
Good morning. I am Esaú Victor, and I am PhD student at the National Museum. And here, this is my part of my thesis, and it focuses on a new and promising field in paleontology, which is paleophysiology. And our study is based on paleohistology techniques combined with statistical analysis to estimate the thermoregulatory capacity of pterosaurs. And next slide, please. When we look at the history of thermoregulatory history of tetrapods, we have two different paths emerged in archosaurs. And in living crocodilians, we have ectothermy, and next, please, endothermy birds. Okay, Next, please. So we have endothermy in two ways, emerged in mammalian and birds. However, there are proposals indicating that pterosaurs represent a and unique evolutionary path. So that hypotheses are based on many qualitative features, including flight capacity, based on many features. Thermal isolation body covering, such as arachnofibers, and large crashes that may play a role in thermal regulation, like heat radiators, and other features such as viviparity and pneumaticity that all suggested endothermy evolution. So we have many problems. Performance physiological analysis is so hard, and because it's recurring specific equipment and conditions. In paleontology, it is challenges amplifies, and we need to have biological machines. We don't have biological machines in operation, so we have solved fossils. Okay, next, please. So you study pioneer, and for the first time, use phylogenetic comparative methods to quantify histological variables and pterosaurs, and estimate your metabolic rates. Okay. This is actually some partnership with French colleagues and has already resulted in some prior publications. Then we have to compare, we compare to 17 species of centropods with not all pterosaurs. Next, please. Our objectives. In this study, we aim to estimate the basal metabolism of pterosaur Cajardo-Bruschi and to understand the thermometabolic strategy of pterosaurs. We use species from the bone bed central Pterosaurs graveyard, and associated to species Cajardo-Bruschi, and species at it housed Centro Paleontológico da Universidade de Contestado. We have 4 bones, 1 femur, 2 femurs, a tibia, and humor. Next, please. Methods. Histological slides of Cajardo-Bruschi were first prepared following paleontological standard techniques. Next, please. These sections were the analysis on image J, and with histological variables such as number of osteons, vascular canals, and osteocytes were quantified as well. Here, the best quantitative variable was osteocyte density. Next, please, Virgin. Okay. The resting estimation of RMER, we have 2 variables, explanatory variables, like density, and dependent variable, resting metabolic rate. Those PMs were constructed including the explanatory variable and phylogenetic database containing 17 living tetrapods. Next. Results. RMER estimation, we have a relationship between oxygen consumption per hour and mass. Sorry. Next, please. Now, suspense music. What does this RMER value indicate? Next. Scarijara, an endothermic species based on quantitative paleontological data. Okay, next. So it's so confused now. You can tell me, oh my God, I don't understand it, but I'm trying to speak for you. Next. Here we have the PM, and in this PM we have the relationship with some tetrapods, living tetrapods, and endothermy and ectothermy. Oh, Borja, come on. Here, Caiuajara. Next, please. So, então, Cajara has a metabolic rate so near to birds and small mammals. Okay, so near, close to. Next. Então, discussion. Relationship with stunt and ectothermic. The rest metabolic rate of Cajara. Oh, a imagem não está aparecendo. The rest metabolic rate of Cajara is so the big than that no ectothermic individuals. There is an image here. No. No. Okay. In stunt endothermic, the rest metabolic rate of Cajara resembles that found in small mammals, but does not extend the current bird. It's so interesting because next. Birds representing the two similar compartments of we have problems. Woo.
We have technical problems. Our apologies, my apologies.
Sorry, guys. I'm so nervous and we have technical problems. The phylogenetic maps highlights the resting metabolic rates obtained of Cajara. The map shows Cajara relationship all their living tetrapods, including reptiles, birds, and mammals, both endothermic and ectothermic. Cajara has metabolic rates. Oh, yeah. The discussion shows the relationship with stunt and endothermics. The resting metabolic rate of Cajara resembles that found in small mammals, but does not exceed that of current birds. It's so interesting because birds have many analogies with pterosaurs and are therefore comparable. Next, please. However, why would bird metabolic rates be higher? Most likely, it's though these animals begin the most of species of the fly, and they exhibit unique traits associated to its habit, such as pulmonary system, lichen, thorax, that optimize oxygen consumption. Problems again. In conclusion, we have Kikaja Dobruski area values compatible with endothermy, and the species exhibiting right metabolic rates, its resting metabolic rates not right that live in birds. In future perspectives, we aim to obtain quantitative pathological data from different groups, considering various bird size, to understand bird groups' thermoregulation. That's it. Sorry for my English. I'm trying. Okay.
Thank you, Esaú. Does anyone have any questions for him? Joseph.
My advisors, please come here. Okay.
First of all, well done. My question is, have you looked at
Slow, please, slow.
have you looked at fossil bird bones to see if the correlation meets with modern bird bones? So in other words, your determination of comparisons with modern birds holds up to fossil birds?
Eu posso responder em português, você pode em inglês? I'm in Portuguese, ok? Sim, os nossos estudos, eles são comparativos. A gente compara extant animals, animais existentes, com animais fósseis, no caso, o Kaiowajara dobruski. Nessa comparação, a gente tem um banco de dados com informações da fisiologia e do metabolismo desses animais viventes.
So what he's saying is, let's do simultaneously.
Ok, então, quando a gente faz as comparações, a gente tem um banco de dados com relações fisiológicas de animais viventes que serão comparados com os animais fósseis.
So he has access to a database, but he's access all this data to compare with living birds.
Ok. E daí a gente pega esses dados que são lançados no software R e ele vai comparar as nossas informações quantitativas com esses animais viventes.
So he put all this data, put in software, and this software on itself is going to analyze this data and make the comparison. Usou fóssil?
Não, só viventes, só aves
Only
viventes.
living specimens. Se você fizesse com fósseis, talvez ajudaria.
Também, mas aí tem as questões de materiais,
So
etc.
material access,
E os ossos que são utilizados nessas análises precisam ser ossos específicos. A gente só pode
and
usar
specific bone elements, he's saying. Very
fêmures,
specific one. Femora,
húmeros, tíbias.
humeri, TBA. So yeah, very specific elements. Obrigado.
Hi, Joseph. In this methodology, you have to use published material and databasing. So if people have to make this with many specimens, species, so we can compare with our results. So we need more people working in other taxa, so we can enlarge this database, and the comparisons will be increased with that. So basically, it's not a methodology that you can follow yourself. You need a group, you need other people working together, like a web, like a rede, como eu falo na rede? A net, like a network. It's a networking work, research work.
Any other questions? Alex.
Isaú.
Oi, Alex.
Now, what I want to say is I want to congratulate you.
Thank
We all know the difficulties that is living in Brazil. Joseph and other people that live in the US, you have no difficulties, the advantage you're already born with. Because English is the language of science, so I really would like to thank Isaú for this wonderful presentation and his effort to be part
So
of the
cute.
international
Thanks.
scientific community.
I will say in Portuguese and then in English. Eu gostaria de falar para os estudantes que estão aqui presentes que se espelhem nesse exemplo, né? Que se espelhem nesse exemplo. Não tenham vergonha de fazer suas apresentações no inglês que vocês podem fornecer, porque é o melhor que vocês podem dar, e assim vocês vão se comunicar. Então, não tenham vergonha de ler uma apresentação, não tenham vergonha de apresentar o inglês que não seja perfeito. Tá? Vocês precisam fazer isso para vocês se tornarem cientistas que comunicam sua pesquisa. I was talking with the students here. Most of them are not presenting their works because they don't speak in English. So encourage them to make the presentation with the English they can give, because doing that, they could communicate their research. So this is the message. Thank you, Esaú.
It's my first first time here. Na próxima eu estarei better, okay? Next, I'm better. No, I'm trying.
So now we have our coffee break, and we are going to return here at 10:30. Okay? Thank you.